When my son Corey was about 13 years old, he and I were shopping at the Best Buy here in Rochester, and we were looking at the music CDs. Corey was begging me to buy him a CD of a rapper called Lil Wayne. Corey said, "Come on, Mom, this is a classic." Well, I didn't agree with that, and I didn't think I wanted to listen to that voice all the way home from Rochester to Red Wing. So I said, "That is not a classic." And then one caught my eye. There was a CD with a black and white picture on it. I picked it up, and it said, "Louis Armstrong's Greatest Hits." So I told Corey, "Now this is a classic." You know that jazz musician who sang What a Wonderful World? I was going to give my son a music lesson. So on the way home, I excitedly popped that CD into our car stereo, and I was thinking that my son was going to be impressed. So I asked him, "What do you think?" He grumpily replied, "He sings like a croaking bullfrog." He's kind of right. Corey didn't want to hear it, but I loved that gravelly, one-of-a-kind voice. I could have listened to Louis Armstrong all day. I guess we all get to choose the voices that we want to listen to. Or do we? While preparing this sermon, I decided that I was going to pay attention to the different voices that I was hearing throughout my week. For instance, I was watching an interview with Miley Cyrus. She was talking about her conversation she'd had with Dolly Parton about wardrobe and makeup for this New Year's Eve special that they would be hosting together. Dolly asked, "Now how va-va-voom are we going to go here?" Listening to the two of them made me think of society's expectations concerning appearance. And then the memory of a familiar voice from my life came back to me. I remembered being with my mom out shopping somewhere and her saying, "You need lipstick." Well, I questioned her use of the word need concerning lipstick, and yet it still stuck with me. To this day, I keep lipstick or colored chapstick pretty close at hand, even after forgetting one time that I had a tube in my pocket and ruining a whole load of white laundry. I especially heard that voice during COVID when I was an intern pastor. I was recording all kinds of videos, and every class I was on camera, and a voice would come back to me thinking, "You don't want to look pale or washed out. You need lipstick." Now, I hope you don't judge my mom for that comment. She was just trying to help me, and she had been influenced by the voices of her generation. Maybe you have been too. How many of you know what color you should never wear after Labor Day? All right, let's hear it. White. Look at that. How many people knew that? Can you finish this sentence? Big boys don't cry. Yeah, there's these voices in our culture, and they're basically saying that you need to hide your real self in order to be acceptable. I was listening to a podcast this week, and I heard a middle-aged man tell the story of a voice that he had heard when he was an 8th grader. He was talking about being on a traveling basketball team with kids that weren't from his school. He was a smaller kid, but the coach's son was a big, strong, athletic kid. And their team had won a tournament over the weekend and gotten a trophy. This man remembered vividly when he walked over to the trophy to take a look at it. And the coach's son said, "Don't you touch it. You did nothing to earn it. You just sat on the bench the whole time." The message in that voice was, "You don't belong here. You're not good enough." And then I was watching the news last week, and there was a story on Section Yellow at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. It's a sober section in the stadium where no alcohol is served. It was started by a recovering alcoholic who wanted to have a safe place for other people who wanted to be sober at the games. This is one of 14 stadiums that offers a section like this. Listening to the interviews with people who were enjoying this space, It was clear to me that this project was in response to the voice of the beer commercials that was trying to communicate that you have to drink to have fun, which is another way of saying you're not lovable the way you are. These negative voices, they might be subtle, but they're very pervasive. Haven't we all heard voices that have made us feel unlovable or inadequate at one time? It's the same old song. You need to conform or perform in order to matter or to belong. Then I was listening to the voice of a seasoned pastor who was preaching to new pastors. One of the pitfalls that he warned us about was listening to the accolades from people who praise you. He said, if you aren't careful, you'll start to believe them, and then you can get a big ego, and that'll lead to your downfall. So if the way to combat negative messages is not to listen to the voices of people who build you up, what are we to do? To whom shall we go? Well, let's see what we can discover in our scriptures for today. When Jesus came to be baptized, John recognized right away that he felt unworthy. But Jesus said it was necessary for John to baptize him to fulfill all righteousness. Well, Jesus wasn't in need of forgiveness of sins, so it's a bit confusing. Why did Jesus get baptized? Well, if we study the voice from heaven that broke through the clouds, maybe we can gain some clarity. The voice said, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." "This is my beloved Son" is a quotation from Psalm 2:7. Every Jew accepted that psalm as a description of the Messiah, the mighty King who was to come. It was an echo from their past that they would recognize. "With whom I am well pleased" is a quotation from Isaiah 42:1, which is a description of the suffering servant. Here's another echo from the past that the Jews would recognize. So the voice of God assured Jesus of two things. One, he was the chosen king, and two, he was here to suffer and to serve. His throne would be the cross. His only weapon would be his suffering love. This was the only way to conquer sin, death, and the voice of evil that tries relentlessly to drown out the voice of God. By being baptized, Jesus was assured of his identity and his purpose. And after this powerful event, where Jesus was assured of his identity and his purpose, he would be led out into the wilderness. There he would hear a different voice. The voice of Satan would try to tempt him to abandon his mission and to put his trust in food and in wealth and in displays of power instead of in God. But Jesus held on to the words spoken to him in his baptism, and he refused to listen. Now, if the voice of Satan tried to drown out the voice of God in Jesus' life, we who follow Jesus shouldn't be too surprised when evil tries to utter lies to us too. Lies like God doesn't care about you. You haven't done enough good to please God. You don't measure up. You're worthless. It's a battle. And that's why we include things in our baptismal service like promising to pray for the baptized and stressing the importance of coming together as a community of faith. There's strength in numbers, right? We need each other. And then there's this part in the baptismal service where everyone is renouncing Satan in all the ways that he tries to draw us away from God. I think that sometimes we forget to renounce those voices in our daily lives after we leave church. Now, I've simplified the language a little bit, and I'd like you to join me in saying this version together. The words are on the slide, but let's not just read it back and forth and not even think about what we're saying. Let's really think about this. This is a protest. Get mad. We're not going to take it anymore. All right, so I really want to hear you. And those of you who are listening online, you shout it out too. Do you refuse to listen to the voices that defy God? Do you refuse to listen to the voices that rebel against God? I'm not listening. Do you refuse to listen to the voices that draw you away from God? I'm not listening. Yes, like Jesus, we find our identity and our purpose in baptism. Your identity is child of God, and your purpose is sharing the gifts that you have been given with love. And baptism is not a one-time event in your past, but something that we return to day after day, hour by hour, for comfort and strength and forgiveness and purpose. It's the voice of God that we want to listen to. And God says, "My beloved child, I am pleased with you. You belong to me, and you are gifted." I encourage you to pay attention this week to the voices that you hear and to find ways every day to remember and to return to your baptism. In closing, I would like to leave you with a mental picture. How many of you have seen the TV show The Voice? Raise your hands. All right, some of you haven't, so let me describe what it is. It's a show where singers who are regular people, they're not famous yet, they come and they perform, and they get the opportunity to be coached by famous musicians like Blake Shelton or John Legend or Miley Cyrus. At the beginning of this show, of the season, they will hold what's called the blind auditions. The coaches are all seated in these great big red chairs that will rotate at the push of a button. During the auditions, they are facing away from the stage, so they can't see the singers, but they can hear them. And if they hear a singer that they want to have on their team, then they will push their button and their chair flips around so that they face the stage now. If no coach pushes the button during a singer's performance, then that singer goes home and they are off the show. There's a live audience and there's a house band. The nervous singer walks out onto the stage and starts singing. Now, sometimes there's this really beautiful thing that happens. It's my favorite thing to watch. And this is what I want you to imagine. Almost immediately, the coach hears just a few notes and hits that button with gusto, telling the world, "I want this one." And then that singer, who thought they were going to have to win over the judge, no longer has to worry. She's been chosen. She's been approved. The two of them make eye contact, and she sees the coach smiling, dancing, singing along, looking proud, and just having a ball. Her family and friends, they go crazy, and now that singer is completely spurred on, no longer afraid, not feeling any pressure. The freedom that she feels by being chosen, excuse me, it's falling off. The freedom that she feels by being chosen just spurs her on, and now she's not singing to try to prove herself. She's singing for the sheer joy of the gift of her music and sharing that with her coach and with the world. Now that's what I think it looks like to live as a baptized and a free child of God who's tuned in to the voice of God. People of God, open your ears to the one who holds you dear, and go share your gifts with the world. Amen.